Now, this would be a valid criticism if my only point in the video were just to say that the current tactics don't work. But again, that has not been my point, and I'm trying to make it as clear as possible that it isn't my point. The point of my videos has also been that these tactics are actually actively harmful, that they set us back and actually make people more firmly believe the things that they do. And again, I've provided evidence to support that claim. The second real purpose of the videos were to sort of open up the discussion of why people believe the things that they do and what sort of tactics actually work. And I think those two issues are actually related. So if you think that religious belief is motivated by fear of death, for instance, then your approach to religious people is going to be very different than if your reason for thinking people are religious was that they merely wanted to fit in, or that it provided some sort of explanation for natural phenomenon. Like, these are important questions that need addressing, and we've only really gotten to scratch the surface on giving a cohesive answer to them. I wanted to give a set of facts that need to be explained, and I think the videos have been really aimed towards that. We have a set of facts, we know sort of what is going on with religious belief, and that does impact the way we approach people. Now, this sort of response is actually very hard for me to address, just given time constraints. If you are a skeptic of the reduction of mental states to brain states, then it's really not in the span of 12 minutes worth of video that I could ever explain that relationship to you, and even then there's no guarantee that you'd believe me. There is actually an active debate in the literature around this exact issue. So what I think would be reasonable is for me to say that if you're skeptical of the relationship between the mind and the brain, then feel free to read my analysis of brain states as being some kind of analogy. Read it instrumentally, if you like. The point really is to give a scientific explanation for why people don't sort of instantly change. That sort of road to Damascus version of religious conversion is really not supported by any kind of literature at all. And I think further that we're better informed by an analysis of psychology, an analysis of real literature, than we are just sort of making up theories on our own. So if you don't believe in that type of strong reductionism, I still think you're wrong, but importantly also, you can read it instrumentally. The take-home message was that people just don't quickly change their beliefs. It's a long, involved process, and they might change in ways that aren't really expected or anticipated by the people who are providing the message. So if I wasn't concerned about the scientific literacy in our community before, I certainly am now. Because the people who are making this claim are not instantly saying, like, as they pronounce the words or type it onto the keyboard, that they're providing the exact same level of proof that homeopaths do for their medicine. It's not enough to just say it works. We have to know the mechanism of why it works. There's also the issue of having real controlled experiments. Someone who says to me that they changed their mind because of a video Cult of Dusty did, that they changed from being religious to an atheist, then I would just have further questions for them, like how religious were they before they watched the video? Why were they watching the video in the first place? How long did that change occur? So we really need controlled scientific experiments. Also, as an aside, that we have a very big selection bias happening here. We're only getting the people who find my video, who still watch YouTube videos on this subject, and that are confident enough to comment themselves. So that's very different than taking an entire sample size of religious and non-religious people, of fundamentalist and non-fundamentalist, of liberal and conservative, and then testing to see how effective each message tactic is on that population and where the correlations occur. This applies equally for people who have been saying that the message works on moderates. Well, you can't just say that. You actually need proof of that, and having anecdotal evidence is no kind of proof at all. Until someone offers me some kind of scientific paper on the subject, then I'm going to listen to the, although analogous, research that's done on the political sphere, because at least it's better than nothing. And what I've gotten from these kinds of responses is, frankly, a lot of nothing. Now, many of these responses either implicitly or explicitly rely on a theory of psychology called behaviorism, founded by B.F. Skinner, who's actually in my latest video, just a quick clip of him. But this theory has been fundamentally displaced in the scientific literature, and with good reason. And actually, I think that the reason why this sort of response fails is kind of a case study in why behaviorism itself fails. One of the central problems with behaviorism came down to what's called a framing effect. To use the analogy to the videos, how do we know that watching these videos will produce an aversion to religion rather than an aversion to atheists? For that matter, it could just as easily produce an aversion to YouTube, or to internet browsers, or to computers. I think if anything were being averted from the stimulus, it would be the channels which cause the negative affect, not the religious belief, because don't forget that the religious belief also has some reinforcement factors. So really, unless we're talking about a situation where someone's actually being strapped to a chair and forced to watch atheist videos, and we know for a fact somehow that this is causing them to be averse to religion rather than averse to, say, being strapped in a chair and being forced to watch YouTube, then unless we have that kind of situation, then it's really not a good psychological explanation, and is really fundamentally actually unscientific reasoning. The point I want to make here is to pause everything and make absolutely clear that I'm being understood. I never, at any point in any video, said we were trying to convert the fundamentalist or convert the hardcore believer. I know just as well as you do that this is unlikely. My point was, first of all, that the so-called moderates, when they are tested, are not convinced by these tactics. And secondly, by the people who actually across the spectrum, who are given these tactics, actually start to resist them and make the job harder again for everyone that's been trying to promote rationality in the world today. But I also kind of want to pause here as well and ask a question about priorities, because it seems to me that a lot of the comments around this kind of response have been centered on the idea that we were going after the moderates rather than the extremists, or the Ned Flanders sort of character rather than the Osama bin Laden. And my response to that is to say, well, really to ask, why is that the priority? I would certainly think that high on our priority list would be actually to stop the Jerry Falwell people, because they're the most dangerous. Reducing support for them is far more important to me than stopping the Ned Flanders character, or the casual churchgoer that goes every Sunday and gives a few dollars to the church collection plate. That to me is much lower on the scale of priorities than someone who's nominally religious, someone who has some sort of rational idea of what they believe, and is ready to engage and discuss and have open dialogue about these sorts of issues. That, to me, isn't really that bad of a thing, and certainly not something that I would like disappearing from the world.